Perfect. So, yes, I'm Gemma Golding. I'm an ecologist at the RHS. I work with all 5 of the RHS gardens, not just RHS Wisley, but I am based at Wisley. I joined the RHS just over a year ago, and it actually is a new position following the production of the RHS sustainability strategy. So as Richard said, before I joined the RHS, I worked as an ecological consultant, and I largely worked in kind of housing development projects, carrying out protected species surveys, and also carrying out calculations for biodiversity net gain and also urban greening factor, which is a requirement in a lot of London planning applications. And yeah, so my office was based in London, but I'm originally from Banstead in Surrey, so I'm very glad to be working back in Surrey. Just a kind of stat for you, the RHS has 600,000 members, and we support the UK's 30 million gardeners. So it shows what kind of an impact we can have. And yeah, so before I joined in October 2022, there were 2 documents that were put together. The first is the RHS Science Strategy, which has 3 key themes. And the first is promoting garden plant diversity. The second is environmental gardening and well-being. And the third is plant health, healthy plants, gardens and wildlife, which is the most relevant to the work that I do. And it sets to encourage good stewardship of nature in gardens for environmental benefits. The other document is the sustainability strategy, and that's probably kind of a large part in kind of how my role developed. And as part of that, we committed to be net positive for nature and people by 2030. And there are 6 targets for nature as part of the document. So that is climate positive, biodiversity positive, biosecurity neutral, water neutral, circular plastic, and zero waste to landfill. The one kind of related to my role is biodiversity positive, and you'll see that the majority of those targets are for 2030 to achieve. But us, along with biosecurity neutral, are 2025, which is fast approaching. So the idea of target 2 is to reverse habitat destruction in gardens and community green spaces around the country, also to protect and improve conditions for pollinators and other wildlife, and then also to enhance and conserve cultivated plant diversity for the future. So the targets are kind of split into 3 kind of sections. The first is downstream, so RHS members gardening and the general public, our own operations, and then also, so our own operations would be things like gardens and shows, and then also upstream, so think about policy makers and regulators and industry. So yeah, so my role is largely focused on our own operations, and yeah, so I basically am using my experience from working as an ecological consultant to help work towards our aim to be biodiversity positive. And yeah, so I coordinate ecological surveys, which target habitats and species within the gardens for both monitoring purposes, but also to help us establish an evidence base for the value gardens have to UK biodiversity. So I'm also developing a plan to get us to where we need to be for us to reach our 2025 goal. And alongside monitoring and surveys, it also includes things like how we store and share our data, guidelines for staff on how to garden when protected species are present, injured wildlife protocols, and how we think about the wildlife risks associated with glow and the impact of artificial lighting at night. So for those that don't know, glow is our winter lighting event, which takes place over the Christmas period. So as well as kind of monitoring, in terms of species presence, we need to think what is biodiversity positive and how we can measure this. So obviously we have the records we can make in the gardens, but there's also thinking about biodiversity in domestic and community gardens. This is quite difficult because a lot of domestic gardens obviously are private spaces. So how can we monitor this? We can think about public attitudes and behaviour. We can think about engagement in campaigns. So we partner with the Wildlife Trust for our campaign Wild About Gardens, and every year there's a theme. So last year it was lawns and how to manage lawns in a way which is good for wildlife. We have to try and create some relevant key performance indicators, and we can also think about using our inquiries and online activity as a way of monitoring people's awareness of biodiversity in gardens and kind of what we can do. So just to think about where our gardens are, other than Wisley, there are 4 other gardens. And I just wanted to share their location, but also kind of share an understanding of when we do our surveys and think about the value of our gardens. We have to think about the connectivity to our neighbours, and think about what role our gardens play in connecting different habitats, and how we can think about what species might be present according to the surroundings. So it's also important to note that most of the garden boundaries aren't actually limited to the areas open to the public. So there are some other habitats which may in some circumstances be more kind of managed for wildlife and exist more in terms of native species, as well as the kind of more formally managed areas that the visitors can access. So first of all, looking at RHS Wisley, we're adjacent to an SPA, Special Protection Area, and SSSI, a site of special scientific interest, and the River Wey runs along our border. So we're very well connected to some very important habitats. RHS Hyde Hall, which is in Essex, and the dot to the furthest to the right, is surrounded by farmland. There's also a new vineyard that's popped up next to it. And kind of a good example there is when you think about harvest mice. So the Mammal Society run a national harvest mice survey, and they publish their results. And in one of the recent reports, they shared findings that they'd found field margins, the nests of harvest mice might more often be found in field margins than other areas. And we recently at Hyde Hall found harvest mice nests in our ornamental grasses in the formal areas of the garden. And we also found this at RHS Rosemore, so the garden in Devon. And this can show that kind of the value that gardens can provide as an extension to the more native habitats that surround us. Then RHS Bridgewater is our newest garden, and it's based in Manchester. And when the pre-development surveys were carried out, one of the things that came up in the desktop study was that Middlewood, which is a kind of a wood which is within our boundaries, is a site of biological importance. So it's locally important for wildlife, and it's designated because of the mature plantation woodland and the breeding bird assemblages it supports. RHS Rosemore in Devon, so to the far left, has the River Torridge running through it, and it's surrounded by a beautiful countryside. And Harlow Carr in the kind of the northernmost garden has a stream running through it and is connected via deciduous woodland to a local nature reserve. So they're all kind of in areas of surrounded by habitat of value. So then moving on to our records and our data gathering, since I arrived at the RHS, I have been collating the information that we have and can give you a bit of an insight into what we found out. So we store our data, we have data from a variety of sources, but one of the things we have is quite a lot of historic records. And across all the 5 gardens, we have over 50,000 records stored on a program called Recorder 6. And these date back to a record of the brimstone butterfly from the Wisley estate in 1891. So that was 12 years before Wisley Gardens was donated to the RHS. And the records we hold include rare and uncommon plants and animals, as well as more than 100 UK priority species, which are recorded across the 5 gardens. So that includes a stag beetle at Wisley, otter at Rosemore, and brown hare and turtle dove at Hyde Hall. And the surveys include specific surveys such as for bryophytes and mollusks, and kind of different surveys that have been made, that have been carried out, and records that have been made by specialist recorders. And yeah, so all the data on this Recorder 6 has been shared with the National Biodiversity Network and are publicly available online. We're very keen to share our data where possible. So we also have the Rothamsted Insect Survey, and this is a light trap which has been running at RHS Wisley since May 1975. And it's actually now one of the longest consistently running traps with the data sent to Rothamsted Research. And to date, more than 400 species of larger moth have been recorded in the Wisley trap. And this active involvement in a long-term survey is vital in order to determine changes and trends in UK biodiversity, particularly in the light of climate change. So the data collected is used primarily to monitor the distribution, flight period, and abundance of larger moths. And these are essential to the food chain and can provide pollination services as well. So we also use visitor sightings. So if you're ever at Wisley or any of the other gardens, do please share your records and your sightings. In the Wisley Bird Hide, we have a board, and we're keen to see what birds people have seen whilst they've been there. And we do take photos of these, and we do store the records on our system, so it's helpful to see. The only thing is we sometimes do get some very interesting sightings, which probably weren't really there, but you know, we appreciate all the records and what is there. We also are encouraging the use of iNaturalist, and we have our own project which covers the 5 gardens. So if you are using iNaturalist and you're in the gardens and you take a photo and you upload it, the way the project works is that anything that's recorded within our site boundaries will automatically get added to our projects. So that's a really useful tool for us. And we are keen to look at creating some more targeted projects, which can help us ask some very specific questions about what's happening in the garden. Some ideas that have been considered are for bumblebees or for fungi. So that's something to watch out for. And this is a map which is actually taken from the iNaturalist web pages, which shows some of the recordings that have been made. And obviously it says visitor sightings, but a lot of them are also made by staff. Anyone with a phone can snap and take a photo and upload. And the different colours are different species groups. So it's really interesting to see, and we can take exports of this data and see what we are recording. So away from these kind of historic and ad hoc records, we also are keen to do surveys, and this kind of monitoring is really important. It helps us assess what we have and help us think about the quality of our habitat and the function of ecosystems within our gardens. It enables us to discover rarities needing protection or species of importance. We can use it to track trends and impacts of climate change. It's really good to also for us to be able to contribute to national recording And another one, which is kind of aside from maybe the data collected, is to increase the skills and enthusiasm of our staff and volunteers. We want people to get excited about what they're seeing, and we want them to be interested and kind of help us. So we have a number of national monitoring schemes that we take part in, and yeah, it's really good for us to do this, so that our data can contribute to larger data sets and research, but also so that we can compare our site with others nearby. And from an internal point of view, it helps us ensure that the methods used across our sites are consistent and that the data is easy to review. Often we're also relying on staff and volunteers to help with surveys. So using these national monitoring schemes means that often there's resources available to use already, which is really, really helpful. So the first one that we've been doing is UK BMS, which obviously you will all know about. And this survey we are doing in 4 out of our 5 gardens, with the help of local coordinators setting up routes in each. So Bill very kindly has helped us with our route at Wisley, which is really, really appreciated. Rosemore is the only one at the moment that is not taking part, but we're hoping to get this set up soon. At Wisley, the survey was carried out in 2015, 2016, and then stopped for a while and was resurrected in 2022. And then at Hyde Hall, surveys have been carried out since 2018 with a break in 2020, and Harlow Car and Bridgewater started this year, which is really exciting. So this is our route through Wisley. Section 1 goes through our Oakwood area. Section 2 comes up through our glasshouse borders up here. And then section 3 is our orchard and wildlife garden. Section 4 is our exotic garden and cottage garden, some of the more formal areas. And section 5 is the alpine meadow. And the section this year where butterflies were recorded most was section 3, so the orchard and wildlife garden, followed by section 2, the glasshouse borders. And these were also the areas where meadow browns were most recorded. And we'll have some other kind of extracts from our data. So the large white was most recorded in section 3, and the holly blue was most recorded in section 2, the glasshouse borders. And across all our sites, the meadow browns were actually the most recorded, with the highest count at the end of July. And the Wisley surveyors had to buy counters, because we were struggling with so many. And actually over double the number of meadow browns were recorded than previous years. And we wondered whether partly could have been due to our management and going through the orchard where, you know, we're managing things differently and the grass has been allowed to grow. And as kind of in line with some of with the rest of the country, we found that there were higher red admirals in all the sites. So that's just kind of an idea of how we were running the survey at Wisley. We had 4 people doing the survey, and we rotated. So each person did a walk once a month, and that's how we managed the walk. So going back, we also are doing the bee walk, and this is a bumblebee conservation project. It's walked at both Wisley and Hyde Hall. And at Wisley, we are in our second year of surveys, and it's similar to kind of the butterfly transect. We walk a fixed route between March and October, and we record the abundance of each bumblebee species seen. In the 2022 survey, we recorded 9 different species, and that included 7 of the most common garden bees, but also 2 cuckoo bee species, which are widespread, but in reduced numbers. We also are starting to do FIT counts, which stands for flower insect timed counts. And this is a UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology project, so CEH. And for this, you basically choose one type of flower as your target flower, and they do provide a list of target flowers, but you can pick others. And you mark out a 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter patch containing your target flower, and you count the number of individual flowers of that target species within your patch. And then you set a timer for 10 minutes and you count all the insects that land on those target flowers within your 50 by 50 centimeter patch. And you identify them to broad groups. So you would say it's a bumblebee or a hoverfly. You don't go kind of more detailed than that. So we are actually looking at setting up an RHS project. And at the moment, most of the target flowers set out by CEH are wildflowers rather than garden plants. So we need to think about whether we have specific target plants that would be good to ask about for doing these surveys that would actually be relevant to our research. So I've also put bird surveys under this slide. It's not a national monitoring scheme that we follow in terms of the methodology, but we are looking to use BirdTrack, the app, which is one of BTO's kind of survey tools, and the idea is that it will make us be able to store our data more easily, and less paper and trying to get everything onto spreadsheets. So for over a year, our staff have been walking these bird surveys once a month, and they've done it throughout the year with the help of 2 volunteers as well. And there are 2 groups, and they each have a different route. And between them, they cover the Pinetum, Riverside, 7 Acres, the Orchard, Clear Lake, and the Wildlife Garden. So 2023 was our first full calendar year of surveys each month, and we recorded 55 species of bird during the year. We also have had consultant surveys, which were carried out in 2022 at Wisley. And the idea was when this 2025 deadline was approaching, we needed to have some repeatable surveys. So we had consultants come in and do some walked transect bird surveys. They also did walked bat surveys, and they did static bat surveys as well, where you put a device and you leave it out in the garden, you record for a few nights, and then you take the recordings and you analyze to work out what species had been present. And then we also had invertebrate surveys. And for this, we identified 3 focus areas. The first was the orchard, because it's due to undergo quite a lot of change in the next few years. The second was the Hilltop Wildlife Garden, and this is because it's right next to the new Hilltop building, and it would be interesting to see how the garden develops over time. And the third was the Pinetum Riverside area. And across those surveys, we had at least 9 species of bat recorded. The bird surveys were quite similar to what our curatorial staff found. And we had 389 invertebrate species, which, according to their kind of ranking system, we were told that it was regarded as an above average result. The nationally scarce weevil was also recorded in an acid grassland area at the Riverside Walk. And that is actually the 3rd sighting for this weevil known in Surrey. So that was quite an exciting find for us. We also have done a couple of bat roost monitoring surveys with help from the Surrey Bat Group. And we've been doing some kind of pond dipping surveys, both kind of things that we'd like to build on in the future as well. And then in terms of future monitoring, we're hoping to do some more formalized bird nest monitoring. So where we make sure there's kind of codes on all the bird boxes, and we can feed our results back into the BTO nest monitoring schemes. At the moment, we have quite a lot of boxes and features up, but we don't necessarily have a good way of monitoring how well they're used. We're also keen to think about monitoring some of the bat boxes that have gone up. So there's quite a few bat boxes have gone up as a result of some of the development that have taken place. We've had some that have also gone up by the entrance as part of the kind of M25 works. And so it would be good to see how those start to be used in the future. And you'll probably notice, as I was describing to you, we've kind of missed out reptiles and amphibians as surveys which are kind of taking place repeatedly. So that's something that we're thinking of trying to include in the future, and also to build on our pond surveys and aquatic invertebrate kind of side of things. And actually, this picture here is a nice picture of some nesting, one of our bird nesting on one of our sheds in the wildlife garden this year. So yeah. So we also need to think about other ways that we can monitor how we are being biodiversity positive. So one of the ways is that we want to be embedding this kind of thought process amongst how we work and our practices. We also want to provide habitat and resources across our gardens and share with people what we're doing and why. And we would like to be able to demonstrate best practice to inspire our visitors to do the same. So kind of this idea of embedding biodiversity into our practices, we want to think about new plantings. Can they be more pollinator friendly? When we are thinking about ponds and other water features, are they accessible to wildlife? And is wildlife able to get out as well? Do timings of activities such as hedge pruning and cutting back borders consider impact on wildlife? So do we time it around nesting birds and this kind of thing? And that's really important. Does new design or development take biodiversity into account? So are we designing lighting around sites with this in mind? And can we be creative? Can we make these features look good and exciting? So this is just a video of duckling using one of our ramps, which is really exciting to see when you put these features in and you walk past and you actually see it being used. So that's just a little video. And then we also want to be thinking about what wildlife needs from our gardens. So I've just kind of put a few habitats down here, which are valuable and we think about including as we basically design our gardens and trying to include across our sites. And then we also think about the resources we provide and what is important for wildlife. So obviously food, shelter, nest sites, connectivity, not using chemicals, not harming wildlife, providing water, and also, yeah, so that's just thinking about the resources we can provide and making sure we do that, and we are providing what we can. We also want to obviously inspire visitors to do the same and to kind of do these kind of positive actions. So an example is on the left here, we've got a sign that says, "Take care, wasps at work." So we want these animals to be acting in a natural way and to be using our site. So just to make visitors aware that we are to be careful because that's what's happening. And then on the right is some new interpretation that we've installed by the bird hide. And interpretation is really important because we can do all these things for wildlife, but we also want to be able to share them and for visitors to understand what we're doing. So this one actually used some of the data and information collected from the bird hide in terms of what has been recorded in the bird hide. And we looked at the birds which were most often recorded, and we've made this kind of wheel. You move it with your hand, and you make it, give it, you make it, you all build the power up, and then it tells you about some of the birds and the bird calls that they'll make, so that when you go into the bird hide, you can look out for them. So just some kind of other exciting things that have been happening is this year we've had this story about Roman snails. So the glasshouse borders were meant to undergo a transformation, and they're meant to become this immersive perennial paradise designed by Pete Aldorf, who created the original borders 20 years ago. But a small population of Roman snails was discovered, which delayed plans. So Roman snails are a protected species that require a license to handle. They're naturalized species in the UK, thought to have been introduced by the Romans for food, but they are now offered protection under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So we couldn't just go tearing up the beds. They are rarely found in gardens, and their UK distribution is restricted to pockets of southern England. So it was quite exciting to find them, although not really expected. Their presence is generally kind of in alkaline limestone and chalk areas, whilst Wisley's underlying rock is acidic sandstone. So it's thought that the top dressing of limestone chippings in the borders made them suitable for them. So a plan was drawn up to relocate the snails to another suitable site close by. And Martin Willing from the Conchological Society of Great Britain and Ireland kindly came and helped us, and he provided training. And as a result, a few of our members of staff were appointed as agents, so could now handle the snails for the purpose of relocating them. So we started in May and continued working until the autumn with the snail team, as they were kind of now called, carrying out 2 snail sweeps per week. And they would carefully search through the borders for the signs of the snails. It's quite good when it's rained, which I wasn't quite used to, because often our surveys require fair weather and we're out there in the rain looking for snails. And though only a handful of individuals were expected, the team found and relocated over 40. And we used Tipex with and marked numbers on each one, so that we could monitor whether the snails were actually finding their way back, and we would have to kind of relocate them again. So that was quite an exciting project. We've also been doing some badger monitoring with some help from the West Surrey Badger Group. And so I've just shared a couple of videos here where you can see an inquisitive badger looking at our camera traps. And then another one here, some young. And then this is kind of an example of how we've tried to cater for the badgers, where we've kind of installed 2-way gates because they were digging through. But actually, if you look to the left, you can see the gate, and if you can look to the right, you can see some digging. So yeah, it's interesting to see what's been going on, and they do use the gates, but they also kind of are creatures of habit and will dig where they want. And yeah, so that comes to the end of my talk. Thank you for listening, and let me know if you have any questions.